I bought this land because I wanted peace. You know that silly idea of thinking that living in a remote place, with trees all around and frogs croaking at night, would be like a spiritual retreat? I bought this land with that illusion in mind. I built a simple house, set up my chicken coop, let some dogs loose, bought a rocking chair for the balcony, and, to top it all off, installed an electric fence. Not to protect me from thieves, but from my neighbors. Because in the end, they're the ones who rob you the most. Peace, patience, sanity. But no one warned me that this plot, isolated and seemingly far from the world, was part of a so-called residential expansion area regulated by the HOA. That's a nice name for a group of slobs who think they're the municipal authority, because they print colorful bulletins with ridiculous rules. I didn't know that. When I signed the contract, I was more concerned with whether the well had water and whether the sun was hitting the balcony than with this neighborhood association. But the devil of the organization came knocking on my door in the third month. A woman in a flowered blazer, a bird brooch on her shoulder, and a clipboard that she held like a royal scepter. She arrived talking loudly, walking like someone inspecting meat in a butcher's shop, and with that smile that looks like cordiality, but it's just well-disguised poison. I was on the balcony, with a cigarette in my mouth and a glass of hot juice in my hand. Her first sentence was, "That fence is not allowed, according to the aesthetic standards of our community." Aesthetic standards. The woman actually used those words to talk about an electric fence that is barely visible in the middle of the bush, that sits behind bushes. It doesn't sing, it doesn't flash, it doesn't give off colored smoke. It's just a fence. It's thin, functional, and shocked my drunk cousin once. And it was kind of funny. But according to her, it spoiled the visual harmony of the whole. I thought about laughing, but took a deep breath. You try to keep your composure when you feel you're dealing with a person driven by whim, not logic. I tried to explain that the fence was part of my security system, that I raised animals, that it was my property, and that, honestly, no one was being forced to look at it. But it was no use. The woman sounded like a broken radio repeating, "Regulation, regulation, regulation." I left before the desire to put her in the swamp outweighed my maturity. Over the next few days, tickets started arriving. Printed, folded with surgical precision, stuffed into the mailbox like a court summons, each with a new quote from the HOA's coexistence manual. There was one about unauthorized visual elements, another about dangers to the physical integrity of passers-by, and the best of all, one about electromagnetic pollution from unsightly fences. I swear, the woman invented that my fence magnetically polluted the environment. I had to throw one of those papers in the fire because I started laughing and almost choked. But she didn't stop there. She started hanging around. Yes, the woman would show up with a tape measure and binoculars. One afternoon, I caught her at the edge of the plot, crouching down, taking pictures of the fence's wiring as if it were a case of environmental crime. It was like those documentaries of people trying to prove that the lake monster exists. She walked around in circles, muttering things, like someone looking for a pretext to legally blow up the fence with dynamite. It was so absurd that it was funny, but the problem was that she began to convince others, because that kind of person always convinces. They use pretty words, talk about community, and victimize themselves with Oscar-worthy talent. Before long, some of the neighbors began to look at me strangely. They treated me as if I were responsible for all the evil in the neighborhood, as if my fence were a nuclear threat. One gentleman even told me that no one feels comfortable going near your house anymore. The fence is inside, behind a 2-meter hedge. What kind of comfort does he want? A red carpet all the way to the balcony? The situation got worse and worse. She filed a formal complaint. I was summoned to a special meeting of the HOA Disciplinary Committee. I refused. I sent a polite letter saying that I didn't recognize the authority of anyone who behaved like a reality power show, and that I didn't intend to remove anything from my property. After that, the tone changed. She stopped being cordial. She stopped with the printed tickets and started shouting. Literally. One day, she walked down the street shouting, "This is a civilized community. You're not going to turn it into a pig pen." That's when I knew she was going to fuck up. It was only a matter of time before she went off the deep end, and I was already preparing myself. Because those who put on a circus like this don't just want to appear. They want an audience, a spotlight, applause. But this woman was going to get something else. She was going to get a reality check, literally. The funniest thing was that, even after everything, I still tried to believe that maybe she was just a bit over the top. You know, the kind of person who grew up hearing that she has a good eye for decoration, and now thinks she's an international authority on neighborhood aesthetics. But no, this woman was something else. A condo dictator with a thirst for control. And my fence became her personal obsession. While everyone else worried about the bills and the leaks, she spent her days devising ways to turn my fence into a symbol of rebellion against public order. The weeks passed, and, little by little, she disappeared. She stopped talking, no more notes, no new summons, just silence. But a silence that didn't smell like peace. It smelled like an ambush. I knew she hadn't given up. People like that never give up. They only retreat enough to make a stronger move. I began to notice strange movements around the grounds. One day, I saw the gardener from the house at the back staring at the transformer on the pole with a clipboard. The other day, a guy from the condominium maintenance team showed up, but he seemed more interested in measuring the tension in the fence than looking at anything else. The icing on the cake came one Thursday afternoon. I was out in the yard with the radio on, doing absolutely nothing productive, when I heard the sound of metal hitting wood. I walked to the side of the house, a little suspicious, already sure that it was her. And of course, it was. The woman was on her back, kneeling, with a tool in her hand, trying to cut the fence wire with a pair of pruning pliers. A pair of pruning pliers! She thought she was going to fix an energized fence with the same tool that cuts rose branches. She was so focused that she didn't even see me coming. I just stood there, watching. It was comical. Her pose, her concentration, the sweat dripping down her forehead. A determined person, inspired by a cause entirely fabricated in her own head. You could even hear her thoughts. I'm saving the neighborhood from a visual aberration, a crime against good taste. And she, the heroine of common sense, armed with a pair of 15 real pliers. And then it happened. The touch. She placed the metal firmly on the fence, like someone thrusting a sword into an enemy's chest. Only the enemy responded. The shock was so loud that it made even one of the dogs bark. The woman jumped so hard that she fell sitting on the mud, her arms open like a disoriented starfish, her mouth wide open without a sound, just a look of pure despair and disbelief. The scissors flew about 2 meters. She stood still for a few seconds, as if processing that the battle had not been won, but lost with glory and ridicule. I couldn't help myself. I laughed dryly, loudly, and didn't even try to hide it. It was automatic, the laughter of someone who had seen their own pain avenged by physics, because it wasn't just about the shock. It was about everything that woman represented, the invasion, the control, the petulance. And now she was standing there, dirty with mud, her ass wet, her hair disheveled, and her dignity melted. She saw me laughing and got up in a clumsy leap. She staggered, tripped over her own leg, and then came the climax. As she tried to lean on the ravine to climb back up, she slipped with her right foot, went down the ravine on her ass, and fell straight into the swamp. A real swamp, the kind that stinks of dead things, with frogs, mosquitoes, and stagnant water the color of bush juice. It was a wet, greasy sound, as if the universe had given the final applause. She screamed, a thin, high-pitched scream that seemed to come more from her ego than her throat. I stood there, watching everything as if it were a movie. And I don't even like violence, but there are times when reality delivers a spectacle so well done that we can't even interfere. When she got up from the swamp, she was unrecognizable. Her clothes were stuck to her body. The mud was up to her shins. Her shoes were stuck who knows where, and her hair looked like an angry raccoon's nest. She got out of there with difficulty, giving me a look of pure hatred. And I, with a glass of lemonade in my hand that I didn't even remember I was holding, did what any sensible person would do. I raised the glass in a silent toast. The woman snorted, limped off, slipped twice more on the way, and disappeared into the bush, muttering things that sounded like Egyptian curses. I stood there for a good few more minutes, taking deep breaths, looking at the fence. It was intact, proud, majestic. It didn't even look like it had just been attacked by an HOA president armed with garden shears. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. But I also knew that it was far from over, because people like her don't know how to lose. They don't accept that the world can function without being under their control. She was shocked. She fell into the swamp, and yet I knew she was still coming back. The next day, the calm was so strange that I thought I had dreamt the whole thing. The sun beat down lightly on the balcony, the birds played their basic rural morning music, and even the roosters seemed friendlier. For the first time in a long time, nobody looked at me funny. There was no note stuck on the gate, and that woman's shadow didn't even cross the boundary. But, of course, that was just the silence before the scandal. She reappeared 2 days later, but not like before. Now she was in political campaign mode, as if the shock had turned her into a martyr for the cause of rural anti-aesthetics with an electric touch. The woman started going from house to house with a clipboard of signatures, handing out leaflets that she had printed herself, on expensive paper and serif font, to be sure. The headline? "The Fence Rebellion, a Risk to Our Community." Yes, she made it sound like my electric fence was a terrorist threat. It said that children could be electrocuted at the mere touch of the wind, and that my system was a camouflaged trap that put everyone's life at risk. The most absurd thing was that people believed her. She spoke with such confidence that it seemed as if she was being sponsored by NASA and the fire department at the same time. And so the neighborhood was divided. On the one hand, those who thought I was a sociopathic monster creating a bunker surrounded by high-voltage wires. On the other, those who saw me as a local legend, the accidental hero who finally brought justice down from the sky in the form of shock and mud. The more sensible ones laughed, but hid. Nobody wanted to commit themselves. People in this kind of neighborhood are afraid even to take sides on the ideal size of the lawn. Imagine getting into the middle of a mess with electricity involved. Meanwhile, she didn't let up. She went around wearing a neck brace, as if she had fractured her pride. With each house she visited, the tone of tragedy increased. In one, she said she had lost feeling in her left hand. In another, she had a drop in eye pressure because of the fright. She went so far as to say that the smell of the swamp could have caused a respiratory infection, and that the fence caused electromagnetic waves that disrupt pacemakers. I thought it was a joke until I heard it with my own ears. One Thursday night, I woke up to a noise, a car, footsteps, whispered voices. I went to the window and saw two guys standing by the fence, flashlights in hand and what looked like a laser tape measure. They were measuring, photographing, whispering. They looked like investigators from the rural version of CSI. One of them even had a vest. You know that vest that people who want to look important love to wear? One of them. They didn't look like the police or from the electricity company. They were from the HOA's Risk Assessment Committee. It had formed a whole team just to analyze my fence. I went downstairs in the dark, went to the balcony, and shouted that I was filming everything. A lie, of course. The security camera hadn't even been working since the cat pulled the fountain wire. But they got scared and ran off like rats in suits. And that's when I realized she wasn't going to stop. She didn't just want to take down the fence. She wanted to get me out, throw me out. to turn my presence there into a historic mistake to be corrected, with ceremony and fireworks. The next day, I received an official notification, a document bearing the letterhead of the HOA, which I'm sure she created herself in Word, ordering me to remove the fence within 72 hours or face legal, administrative, and, amazingly, moral consequences. Yes, it said moral consequences, as if she was going to distribute posters with my photo in churches saying that I was an electric sinner. But that was the trigger. I decided to do what everyone expects a problem resident to do. I went to the HOA meeting. The headquarters room was tiny, stuffy, and smelled of expired disinfectant. There was flat coffee, stale cookies, and a projector that nobody knew how to use. She was standing at the front, dressed like a lawyer from a funeral plan commercial, a cold smile, paperwork in hand, and a speech ready. She started by talking about respect for the collective, then the limits of coexistence, and then got to the point. My fence was a symbol of the neighborhood's decay. When I was given the floor, I stood up, took a deep breath, and spoke like someone who had had enough of all this clowning around. I told them everything, from the beginning, the invasion, the attempt to cut it down, the shock, the fall into the swamp, every detail. I even used the term, he took a reverse from his own ego in the form of voltage. And then I pulled the final coup. I printed out the images from the front neighbor's security camera, which had caught everything. The attempt, the shock, the fall. The room fell into absolute silence. For a few seconds, even the faulty air conditioning didn't kick in. She tried to explain herself, to say that she was a victim, that she thought the fence was off, that she was trying to help. But nobody bought it. Even the neighborhood's passives began to stir in their chairs. Because if there's one thing condominium people hate more than a fence, it's bad drama. And then, for the first time, I saw her mask crack. She asked to close the meeting. She said she needed time. And she left, leaving half the leaflets scattered on the floor. I stood there, surrounded by stares that didn't know whether to fear me or respect me. But I knew it wasn't the end yet, that a woman like that doesn't accept losing without dragging someone down with her, that she still had one last act up her sleeve, and I needed to be ready when she decided to play her final card. After that meeting, I expected anything at all, from a new offensive with a lawyer involved to a group of residents with torches and placards demanding my exile. But nothing happened. Nothing. For days, I didn't see a suspicious movement. No one came to measure anything. No note appeared. And, above all, she disappeared. She disappeared from the street, from the sidewalks, from meetings, from gossip. The first theory was that she had gone on a trip. Some said she had gone to visit her daughter in a big city. Others swore she was in hospital. But no one knew if it was a hospital or a spa where they stick needles up to your belly button. All I know is that the neighborhood seemed peaceful, real peace, that kind of silence that seems unreal, as if someone had put the neighborhood on airplane mode. And then I started to relax. I thought that maybe, after the fall into the swamp and the public exposure, she had learned, that she'd felt ashamed, that she was processing everything in a white room with a lavender scent and a therapist who charges by the minute. It was foolish of me. People like that don't learn. People like that only hide until they have another chance to appear in a position of superiority. At the end of the second week, the calm ended. I returned home after a busy day and found a truck parked in front of my driveway. One of those big trunks with a landscaping company logo, and 3 men wearing lime green lab coats tinkering in front of it, cutting back bushes, removing stones, moving fences. When I got out of the car and asked what was going on, the oldest man said that they were there at the behest of the neighborhood administration to readjust the entrance to the property, according to the new security standard. New security standards? What standard? I laughed. A mirthless laugh. Just that of someone who recognizes the madness returning. I asked for the document. The paper said, with a notarized signature, that a provisional measure had been approved by the HOA committee ordering the removal of elements that pose a risk to the safety of residents. And the first victim was my fence. The same fence that was intact, signposted, registered, and protected by law. But she had done it. She slipped a new rule through the cracks, passed among the elders who would sign anything for a discount on the gardening fee, and now she was trying to erase my existence through bureaucracy. I went straight to the truck. I locked the gate with a steel cable and told them that if any of them touched a single wire, there would be police, lawyers, and scandal. The guys didn't want any trouble. They got down from their tools and told me they were going to check with the contractor. That's when I heard her car coming from down the street. She came out of the sedan as if she were entering a stage. She was wearing gym clothes, giant sunglasses, and that walk of someone who is absolutely certain that she is above the law, morality, and any sense of the ridiculous. He came towards me saying that I was obstructing a community action and that he was going to call in the authorities. Authorities? I wanted to ask her if she was going to call in the army or just the scouts, but I held back. She pointed at the fence as if she were denouncing a crime in progress, and she began to speak loudly, as if she were giving a speech to an invisible crowd. This resident, from the beginning, has refused to collaborate with the guidelines of the common good. He represents a threat to the progress and peace of our environment. The younger gardener started laughing. She understood, and that seems to have activated some internal rage mechanism. She walked through the bushes, over to the fence, and pointed as if she were witch hunting in the 21st century. I just watched, quietly, because I had already warned her. I'd already left the fence there, signposted. I'd already shouted, explained, filmed, and filed a protocol. I had nothing more to say. All that remained was to watch, and that's what I did. She ignored all the warning signs. She was possessed. She picked up a branch from the ground and tried to push the wire. The branch hit. Nothing happened. Then, seized by the impulse to prove that she was bigger than all that, she put her hand in, again, on the same fence, as if it were impossible for the universe to repeat the joke. But it did. The slap was drier this time, and so was the scream. She fell backwards with less glamour than before, but with twice as much indignation. She rolled in the grass, soiled her expensive overalls, and even dropped her own bottle of alkaline water in the mud. The workers stood still, shocked. One of them tried to help her, but she pushed him away, saying she didn't want anyone to touch her. And it was there, lying on the grass, her pride once again toasted, that she seemed to understand. It wasn't about the fence. It never had been. It was about losing control, about seeing someone say no and not being able to do anything about it. She lost there. Not the lawsuit, not the leaflet war. She lost what underpinned her entire stance, the power to dominate the environment. After that day, she never came back. Some say she moved away. Others say she was banned from taking up any position in the HOA. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. The fence is still here, firm, electric, and victorious. But best of all is the silence. That real silence. No forced steps, no clipboards, no threat printed on recycled paper. Now, every time someone asks me if the fence really gives you a shock, I just smile. And I say, yes, it does, but only on those who deserve it. If you want, I can prepare the ideas for the next story. Just call me. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.